I have to believe that I'm never going to get injured.
This guy is so far ahead of his time.
I love what Einstein said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler, and that sort of mucked around with my head for a long time. What is he saying here,
What do you think the fast bowler of the future will look like, and how or will we need to coach them in the future?
A lot of people talk about injury prevention, which is so important, but no player wanted to hear injury prevention. All they wanted to know is...
Welcome back, everyone, to the latest episode of Science and Shiny. Me and Shiny are delighted to be able to introduce our first guest on the podcast, and it's deeply meaningful for both of us because I don't think either of us would be sat here without this gentleman today. So our guest is Troy Cooley, and we're going to talk through his career and how he's shaped fast bowling science and also the art of fast bowling through multiple decades and across multiple high performance centres across the world.
Welcome, Troy. Great to see you.
Well, it's lovely to be on your show. Thanks for inviting me.
You're obviously in sunny India at the moment, and we'll talk a little bit later about where you are. But if I could just go back to something that Paul said, without Troy's influence and generosity, we both wouldn't be here. If I could really respectfully call you the father of fast bowling coaches moving forward with an eye on science, but clearly we know it's to back up the art that we all love with fast bowling. And I'll take people back to probably around about 2004 or 5. You came down and visited me in Taunton when I was head coach at Somerset. And I'd heard a lot about you, obviously. I was very curious to meet you. And I remember we were sat on the lunch table, just pre a game. And you just started gently to talk to me about the science side of the game and the injuries that were costing us so much. And, I was obviously very aware of that, having been injured a lot as a fast bowler. And then most of my bowlers that I had on my roster at Somerset were injured as well. And you opened up your laptop, and I'd never seen anything like it. But you didn't make it complicated. You said this stuff makes it simpler. And ultimately, if we can't keep guys fit, we can't coach them. And that resonated so much with me. And I think it'll be wonderful for the listeners out there to actually just get an insight into how your career has evolved, your coaching philosophy has evolved. Because I think we've got to be careful with science, haven't we? But we know that it can help us hugely. So, Troy, what I want to do first is just take people back to your playing career, because not a lot of people will actually know nowadays that you actually started out as a genuine fast bowler. You played 33 first-class matches for Tasmania. You learned your club cricket in Launceston. Talk me through that. Was it an injury-free career? Maybe not.
Well, you're talking about fast bowlers. There's no such thing as an injury-free career, But no, yeah, well, take me back. I have to remember back that far. But yeah, Launceston was where I grew up. Great little town up the top end of Tasmania. And I grew up, with a club, which I love and adore, which is called Mowbray Cricket Club. We all love our club. And, we had some champions there. We had some great fast bowlers in that team. And all I remember is being plucked pretty early. I think I was about 15. I was playing in some under-15 game, and Johnny Abrahams, a nice English man, as you know, was our club coach, and he plucked me out and said, "Come on, son, we'll come play some first grade." And at that stage, the first grade career, I was 15. I remember going into a semi and a final, took 4 wickets in a grand final, and beat Launceston, who basically had the likes of David Boone playing with them. The young Ricky Ponting was part of our club as well, but Ricky was he was still in nappies running around, swinging the bat and in the change rooms. But, there were some great players. We had Peter Faulkner, and we had some really good, influential players in the north. So yeah, that was my career started off, and I got through pretty unscathed up until about 17, 18, I think, and then I had my first encounter with a stress fracture. But I didn't know about it then. It was I had the chiropractors, the physios, and the S&Cs all telling me that it was sciatic trouble, all this sort of stuff that we were going through. So it was like it was at the end of the season. But yeah, and I had the rest of the season off, came back, and I was okay the next year, next season. So, but no, it was all interrupted. Started in Launceston, had some really good people around me, and kicked off a career of fast bowling, which unfortunately had a few injuries in it, Shiny, as you know. And that's probably set me up for what I'm doing now. My first piece of coaching advice was don't bowl down leg side, and so I thought I wanted to be a better coach than that, and I had chiropractors clicking me in place saying I was out of alignment, and physios saying I was out of balance, and I had fitness people telling me I needed to be bigger and stronger. So I think those three people now sit well and truly into my life. I have a triangle, and it's player in the middle because I'm player centric, as you well know. Yep. And I have the physio, the S&C, and the coach all housing themselves around this player. And on the external part, we've got the biomechanist, the skill acquisitionist, the nutritionist, and all that sort of spinning around, working with us to try and get that knowledge somehow in a nice little bundle to give to the player, so they can go out and take wickets, stop run, and stay fit to perform.
I remember, Troy, when I took over from you as ECB lead fast bowling coach, and once again, luckily enough, I got to spend time with you before that happened. So I used to go up and do the camps with you. And then I was lucky enough to do that 4-week tour to India when we were doing our transition. So I was able to really learn that triangle that you talked about. And in my 14 years at the ECB, it evolved that part of my thinking, but it's still the way I work to this very day. And I can't ever see that changing. Just want to go back to the end of your career, which was curtailed by injury, sadly. But you played 33 first-class games there. That's your game starting to take effect. Were you actually injured, then you'd play for a little bit, injured, play for a bit, or did you manage to get going at all?
No, it was started all the way through. I think in the end, three occurrences of stress fractures before 25. And then I think I'm still unstable in that position now. I don't think I've got any really good healthy bone left there. But yeah, look at that sort of. I mean, the best bit of advice and what really kicked me going and got me started was, I got introduced to which is the daddy of fast bowling, which was Dennis Keith Lilly. So who's a keen friend and a mentor of mine. And once I'd sort of worked out I couldn't put things together myself, I was chatting to him through the national fast bowling program, which was running in Australia at the time. And, I saddled up next to him and I wanted to learn everything I could about pace bowling. It may have been a little bit late for me, but I think at that stage I was still hanging on to maybe a career left, but that got curtailed a little bit with a final injury. I think I blew my quad out at one stage, and I think Greg Shippert, who was the coach of Tasmania at that time, said, "Listen, Truck, it might be time, to hang up the boots and maybe look at something else." I mean, I was also had a part-time job, a full-time job at the time. It was all semi-professional back then, and he sort of guided me to maybe you can help the other fast bowlers. So he gave me a bit of an idea of getting into the coaching, because I was also trained in fitness, also trained in motor mechanics. I wanted to be a Formula One mechanic at one stage. Speed's in the blood, speed is in the blood. But I gave that away. But I started fixing people in the gym. So I had a health and fitness background. And then he said, "Well, look, I think there's a change coming here. What do you reckon?" He said, "We're moving on a little bit." So he politely nudged me in the right direction, I think, at that stage. And yeah, I hooked in with Dennis Lilly at that point of time, and his great mate, which was Rod Marsh. Those two sort of close mentors put me through that early part and got me really interested in more of the art of fast bowling, I suppose, in that respect. But Dennis Lilly was right into the science of things when he sort of learned how to put his back together, why he was breaking down, and he went through the university in Western Australia and learned a lot about that. And he started to pass that information on to me as well. Started to look at how the biomechanical movements and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that was a big part of that early development, all based on the fact that my body had run out of time and the coach had run out of patience, and I was still really keen to keep involved in the game somehow. And I got a bit of a break at that stage and moved into helping a few fast bowlers out in the gym and with a bit of coaching.
So it's really interesting, Troy. You are probably the most humble man I've ever known in my life, because I obviously read Dennis's book and listened to him talk. Was lucky enough to be invited by you to go to the MRF, which was, as a coach, probably my most memorable couple of weeks, to go and spend 2 weeks with yourself, Troy, and a lovely man called T.A. Saker as well, Shakes, who was an incredible wow. Once again, for me to go away with yourself, Dennis, and Shakes, and learn. I've still got the notes from that, by the way, Troy. I used to sit in the room when we obviously got in at some time. Yep. I can't remember what it was, and I just try and remember it because it was wonderful. But going back to something Dennis said, he would actually say, well, there's actually a guy who's a better fast bowling coach than me, and that was you. And once again, I think that showed the amount of work that you put into not just the science, but the art, and getting that into a blend. So could we just talk about the way Dennis influenced you when you went to the MRF with him? You've obviously met T.A. Saker, or Shakes as we know him. How did that start to add to your coaching knowledge?
Well, I suppose highly technical. So, Dennis had been through the rigours and watched so many fast bowlers come through, had been and still is, mentor to a lot of fast bowlers, Cummings, the whole works, So, and back when he was rebuilding himself to try and get his career back on track, that's when my interest became pretty. I was on more alert with the interest in with the science part of it, because Dennis loved the science part of it, but he also blended well with the art. And I suppose from him I learnt to keep that balance nice. I mean, when I took up the job with Rod Marsh at the National Academy, I had access to the Australian Sports Commission, or the AIS, right? So, and I met up with a great friend of mine, Mark Portis, who is biomechanist, and we know Porto and all the work he did. So he was sort of working out of the AIS hub, and I was working at the academy. So there was sort of the art and science twins there working together. And together we were sort of on tour with Dennis, watching what he was doing, trying to work out how he was identifying what you should change, what you shouldn't change. And we were trying to add why to it. Why is he saying this? Why should we do this? Why should we go this way? And so then I know Mark's analytical mind, which I know Paul sitting up there has got one of those analytical minds, started then going out. So, well, how can we answer these questions? How can we do this better? And some of the things that he started to try and work on to come up with more objective measures and into the research side of it. So I was sort of caught between Dennis, who had a really, really cool outlook on all the knowledge and what he had. He had a sports science love, because obviously that helped him get back on track. And then we had Mark Portis come into the picture as well. And we had the whole AIS, access to the whole AIS and the research team there. So, wow, I started then going into the areas of skill acquisition. So, some cool people sitting at the AIS who are experts in this area. So I would go and knock on their door and say, listen, how do we take this skill from here to here? And they say, oh, come in, we'll have a chat about this. So basically, I was walking into this huge encyclopedia of knowledge of people, and I've always been curious, as you know, and I kept asking them all the silly questions, why, and they kept trying to answer these questions. Then I'd go back to Dennis and say, Dennis, hey, listen, I've got this going on, and he'd say, no, don't worry about that. But I was having this conversation between the art and science world right at the start of my coaching career, and it really sort of got my sort of thinking and my philosophy down that track of, of asking why. And I wanted to find the answers. And I wasn't just happy with the conventional wisdom side of things. Even though some of it worked, I was more interested then in the science world. And Mark Portis was a big player in all that. And I had a lot of fun trying to solve a lot of problems. And when I opened up my laptop to you, you got to look at all that because, we were doing 3D analysis, all that sort of stuff was happening. We were into research, why we would do things. I'd ask silly questions. He'd go and try and answer it. We'd start up a project. We'd get a couple of sports science people in and they'd nick off on a master's or a PhD. And so that was all happening way back then. And what we were doing is, I thought we were starting to build a framework around how we were going to coach fast bowling. And I didn't know that at that stage, but we were starting to build this framework around coaching fast bowling, which had art and science mixed in it.
Yeah, Paul will probably be giggling away now because you were the coach that taught me to think about it differently, which was the what, the why, the how, which gave me that structure to be able to get all that noise that was flying around in my head. I mean, most fast bowlers, when they bowl, have pigeons in their head, don't they? And what you're trying to do is trying to get them to fly in formation so you can actually make some sort of sense of what's going on. And I just remember, you would go back to your laptop, you didn't just open it up, you very kindly pretty much downloaded it for me when you left and said, good luck. And that actually then formed the next 14 years of my life, which was trying to make fast bowling, most importantly, simple. And I still remember the point you made to me, which is if you can't get them fit, you can't coach them. You can't spend time helping them to get better, getting them to ask the question why, and then talking about the how as well. So, I'd be forever grateful for you for that, because it simplified things. And we all know that fast bowling is tough. We also know that the advice can be made really complicated.
Sure.
So can we just go back to the MRF? I can still remember my first trip to the actual MRF training ground when, there were loads of fast bowlers there, weren't there? And we took a select few out to train there. And it made such an impact on me that I kept sending bowlers back. Up until Dennis actually decided that he couldn't do it anymore. Because it was such an influence. And you would see Chris Wokes, for example, Chris Jordan, many England fast bowlers have gone through that amazing experience. When you first went there, you used to help with the analysis, didn't you? I can remember you'd go to the MRF boardroom and you'd have Silicon Coach, one of the first analysis pieces of software in there. Was that then starting to shape your technical mind, or was that happening way before then?
It was shaping well before that. Dennis shaped my technical mind, So Dennis shaped my technical mind, but he didn't need a computer, His eye for movement patterns and things like that was pretty good, and he was shaping me there. I remember Silicon Coach, or it used to be called Video Expert 1 and 2. That was coming out in New Zealand. I remember the boys coming and saying, can you help us? We've got this software. We think it's going to be good. Can you help us develop it? So we'll go back. So Video Expert went to Silicon Coach. But I know Silicon Coach basically started to give us a chance to slow things down and have a look a little bit more deeply. As we know, on the fly, we were making decisions on the fly. And I suppose my dad taught me a couple of good things in life. And one was, to measure twice and cut once. So, and Mum used to say, you've got two ears and one mouth. So, there was a good reason for that. But I was thinking a bit deeper. I was thinking a bit deeper into why. I was thinking, how does Dennis see this? I wasn't as sharp as that, so I had to go and slow it down a bit. So the silicon coach question was allowed me to slow it down. But wow, once I found all these magic tools to be able to, alignment, measure angles, all this sort of stuff. I mean, I was hooked then, and I went into that side. So I would then, Dennis would say something, I would go back, do the analytical work with Shakes, T.A. Shaker, and we would come up and we'd go, the silly old bugger fought Dennis. He's right, So we would give him a bit of support around some objective measures. So I really enjoyed that side of the cool tool that was coming available, which was Silicon Coach. So I loved that.
So I was lucky enough to actually go to the MRF boardroom after you'd videoed the ECB bowlers that we'd taken out there, and Dennis would stand there with his big cane, wouldn't he? Just literally, first of all, he'd be and ahhing. Okay. Oh, and then he'd start to point. He'd move it on, and that was my first real example of his mind working. And not only would he say, "Look, this is the thing that you're doing, and this is how we're going to improve it." That was a totally different way of looking at it for me, and it was the confidence that he spoke with too.
Yeah. Well, he had a lot of knowledge, going around Australia, working as the sole fast bowling coach, that's why he's the daddy of fast bowling coaching. He had his experiences, he'd seen everything, and he was able to really quickly identify certain things very quickly, pick up certain movement patterns, and we would sit there and go, how did he see that? And then we go back to Silicon Coach and, he was right, But one of the great things about Dennis at that stage is if we found something, he was always ready to listen. Like Dennis was still ready to learn and listen. And that's what I loved about him. And that's why I kept my mind so open, And I suppose he, if you could justify why to him, he would say, okay, I can see that. Let's go down that path. So, I think, we sort of helped him move into the digital era with Silicon Coach as well. And, Shakes, T.A. Shaker loved it as well. And, at that stage too, remember, I was back in Australia going to Canberra to the AOS, and we had Vicon running around and doing all this. So I was learning about, how to, 3D imaging, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. My first introduction to that was phenomenal. Now we're back. I used to say that's the gold standard. We come back and use the silver standard Silicon Coach. And even then, we were developing this software. One stage we had one camera, then we had two cameras, then we had the overhead camera. So we're almost setting up, this 2D analysis with 3D sort of fingers in it. We didn't even know what we were doing at this stage, of course. But that was really cool to get that. And, from Dennis, he was open to everything. But yeah, his eye was sharp, shining, as we know. His eye was very sharp, and based on all the experiences he'd had, he could quickly identify errors and the cause of that. He would go to, okay, there's the error, but you know what? Let's wind it back 5 steps and see what happened back here. And he was teaching us, error detection back then, so that was really cool. And we sat in those rooms, and just, we toed and fro, we used all our experiences, and then we come up with a solution, and that's what, we were there for. We were there to help the player. And it was a great experience learning how to do that. Error detection, one of his big things. He knew that there was 5 steps before that may have caused what we were seeing at the end. That
image is still in my mind, where he had the string laid out along the run-up. So he was obviously talking about alignment, which now is just part and parcel of the coach's tool. But then I remember you saying, well, Shiny, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? And I'd do the usual thing back in 2002 or 3, whenever it was, where I'd say, it's his front arm. He said, come on, let's find the cause. Yeah. And as you said there, take it back. What are you seeing? And then I, very, 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 very quickly there, you learned about cause and effect. Once again, something that we've gone massively into in the science now, but it was there a long, long time ago. So, Troy, let's go forward now to you come over, join the ECB in 2003, and obviously you had time to do a little bit of work, and we talk about the famous four: Steve Harmison, Andrew Flintoff, Simon Jones, and Matthew Hoggard, which everybody remembers that amazing series in 2005. But I obviously knew all the coaches in the UK at that time. I was head coach at Somerset. I knew all of the coaches and fast bowling coaches that were around. And when you came over, I can remember being very curious about you, because the ECB had employed a specialist fast bowling coach. That was totally unheard of. You were a pioneer then. And I think there was a lot of, there was some concern amongst the fast bowling coaches that were around, because you were unknown in this country. We knew that there was a scientific background. It was a little bit different. How did you go about trying to influence the coaches that were there, that there might be a different way of viewing fast bowling?
Well, good question. I think I used my mum's advice there, and I kept my ears open and started listening and trying to understand where they were, their coaching, what they were trying, how they were trying to fix things. I came in with an open mind. That's probably what I'm saying. I mean, I had a framework that was evolving. Cricket Australia had a fast bowling program, which I'd sort of come into, and there was a lot of research being done at that stage. It was on the back of Dennis Lilly, and Mark Porter's had done a lot of work. So we had a fairly good idea at that stage, or what we thought we had a good idea at that stage of what were the key things that we really needed to look at. And I suppose out of Mark's research, and I know Paul's done a lot more work after this, out of Mark's research back then was, we were looking for counter rotation, lateral flexion, and even lateral flexion back then wasn't really big. I mean, counter rotation was the naughty word, especially if they're up into the age of about, I think, 23, or when the bones 22, when the bones started to harden. We knew that if this was in the sequencing, then maybe that's something we might have to coach out, because it was a killer and proving to be a killer through the research, So we were looking at things like that. So, we started talking more about mixed actions. We started talking more about counter rotation. We were looking for lateral flexion, but we're also looking for those key things on performance. So one of the things I was keen to do, a lot of people talk about injury prevention, which is so important, but no player wanted to hear injury prevention. All they wanted to know is performance. So as a coach, I had to start to say, okay, well, we're looking at how to improve your performance. So if I started that way, I had the opportunity to sit with them a bit longer. But if I mentioned injury prevention, I was, out the door. Come on, get out. I'm never going to get injured. I don't get injured. I said, okay, well, how come you've got 6 months off here with a stress fracture? Oh, that's not me. That was my part. So I suppose I came in with a framework of things that we had sort of started to prove through science. I had the background of working with some really good players, so I had a bit of history on my side. I had Dennis Lilly backing me, which was phenomenal. I mean, and he's still. And I came in with, I don't know, I'm not the smartest person in the room here, and I wanted to learn a lot more about how fast bowling was evolving, and I listened, and that helped me a lot. Gain some, obviously, first of all, some respect with the great fast bowlers that were already in England, and also be able to have a conversation say, listen, have you thought about this? One of the things here, look, if you counter rotate in more than 35 degrees, this is what it looks like, then your chances of injury, especially under this age, go through the roof. I said the other thing too is, if we get this right, your performance starts to improve as well. So that was sort of the way I sort of got myself into the circle. And I suppose, how I operate. I'm pretty laid back in that area, and I don't try and force things on people. I can't change anybody. All I can do is influence, and I use that model to try and get into that situation. And luckily, I'd had a little bit of work with those with 3 or 4 of them in Australia. We did some work on a run-up with Harmy. We did some work on some other stuff, and I was working for both camps. I was Cricket Australia and the ECP on that test tour. So, and the other thing too is my other great mentor, Rod Marsh, was sitting in the room as well. So he just moved across, and he sort of knew my background. He knew what I was doing. So he was a great introductory piece for me to get into the room and build some relationships. You're not only players, you build relationships. It was a coaching fraternity. And the other thing too is we were stuck at Loughborough University, and I went and chatted to Rod Thorpe, I went and chatted to, the other bloke that's sort of in our little triangle there as well, so we would go and have good conversations. I think I set up a technical team where we could just go and talk about fast bowling without any interruption, As long as it was Chatham House rules, we never went outside the room, but we just talked about fast bowling, and I think that model of mine sort of came across as, it's a holistic way of doing things. It's there's 5 skills that go into the puzzle, and we all kept things pretty open. And if, like any mixture, any cake mixture, if one of the pieces of the recipe are missing, it doesn't come together. So we brought in this 5 skills theory, it's tactical, technical, physical, mental, and I like life skills as well because, so that was a way that we introduced ourselves into the system. And, so we got into the academic world. We brought some good people along there. We got into the coaching world. I already had some good conversations with the players. So I'd sort of built some relationships around that way to try and say, hey, listen, let's do it together.
Yeah, and that stayed with me. It was the Elite Fast Bowling Group that you set up. And you were you're very, very kind enough to involve me on that for a few of the meetings, which once again, that really did just prick my interest. And I kept that running when I took over from you. And part of that was then, with the PhDs that you funded, I carried that on again. So I'd go and bid for a bit of money to, try and answer some of the questions that I had in my head. And that was when Paul came into it. And Paul, can you remember our first meeting? Once again, the man who's sitting in front of us made me a bit tough at times. He's got that very, very kind exterior, but in there is someone who fiercely knows what he wants. And I can still remember the piece of one of the great pieces of advice is keep your eye on the game. Don't lose sight of what's happening around you, because you can have wonderful fast bowlers in front of you 1 minute, and then all of a sudden you've taken your eye off another area. And I still remember that brilliant piece of advice, which was get the top end right first, and then you can go down and have a look at the bit that really interests you. As in you could keep people coming through, you can build a conveyor belt of bowlers. And luckily you'd actually got the top end really strong. So I was able to just sort of, okay, can I get the next guys to come through? And that's when I went to Paul. Paul, so talk me through that first meeting we had, Joe, where I was trying to get the science side of it coming through into our work.
Yeah, I've got 2 memories of our first meeting. One was the job interview for the PhD, where I think we both remember it slightly differently. I walked into the room and Shiny went, when you're working with me, this is what we're going to be doing. And then Mark King, who obviously was the academic side of it, was like, hold on, Shiny, we've not given him the job yet, and then grilled me for about 45 minutes on everything biomechanics. And then the other one, I reckon, must have been like the MRF boardroom, where Shiny was pointing at things and going off on things, and I had no idea of what he was talking about. And it was, I think, that keeping it simple message from like Dennis Lilly is obviously washed through. Of we'd spend hours, wouldn't we? And if I couldn't leave the room without you being able to understand it, it was meaningless. Yeah. So yeah, those first couple of, I think now looking back, we didn't call it what, why, how, or keep it simple, but that's ultimately what we were trying to do. But it's really interesting. It's like looking in the mirror a little bit, Shiny, listening to Troy talk. There's so many things that Troy says that I can see how we've worked together. And I guess our relationship might have been quite similar to what Troy and Mark's was on the other side or just before us. Troy, I'm really interested, like listening to that. Like you wanted to become a motor mechanic in Formula One, which I think is really much science and art as well. Like you're trying to go as fast as possible, but you got to get the science right. And I think that message underneath it sort of washes through everything you've been doing with, like Dennis Lilly, you were looking at what and why, and then you moved on and to the ECB and what and why. And it's, I wonder how much you think of that underlying passion of what you wanted to do as a mechanic and understand probably why things work the way they do kind of underpins your frameworks now, or how you've built those frameworks.
Right. I think you're spot on. I never looked at, I even get in trouble with Molly, my wife, now, because I say, why do you want to do that for? I always ask why. You don't need to just do it. And I said, no, I need to know why. So now I remember, working with Dad, because my dad loved cars, so he was always tinkering with cars, and he still does. So I sort of built that up, and I said, what are you doing that for, Dad? And he'd get angry and tell me to go and get the spanner or go and do this. And, he'd try and keep me occupied. So I was sort of learning on the go, but always asking why. And I had that fascination of why things worked, and I don't know, that was inbuilt in me. And then, somehow speed got involved in that. And, I was, it definitely underpins me. I'm telling you, even now, if someone says this, that's true, I go, why is it true? Tell me why. Explain it to me. I get a bit, they get a bit annoyed with me when I ask tough questions or ask stupid questions or things like that. But I want to know. I want to know why, and that dates back to those days. And I really enjoyed, getting my motor mechanics ticket. I spent 4 years as an apprentice doing all that sort of stuff. I really liked it. But then, I was trying to play cricket at the same time, and I couldn't fix my own body. I was like a good mechanic, always good fixing somebody else's car, but the rough end of the street, it only just got down the end of the street. So I couldn't fix myself, but I could fix other things. And I suppose that's my compassion still, to help other people as well, it's inbuilt there somewhere. I have to probably say that.
So moving on, you talked about your framework and working with Dennis and yourself. Did you go into it from an injury perspective first? And I know that you talked about performance, but talk us through a little bit, like whether you how was it both together, or because it sounds like you're trying to put or understand yourself, understand what Dennis was going through from an injury point of view. But obviously Dennis is known as performance-wise being very good as well. So was it try and keep performance and understand injury, or improve and at the same time?
I think it all came together. It was like pieces of the puzzle. If you looked at my mind, it's like a mud map, and it still is, it has all these pieces flying around, and I sort of knew I had to put a framework around that at some stage, but I didn't want to, there was so much to learn. And there still is so much to learn. But I think it was coming together. I think performance was still number one. I always remember, there's still three things that I say. I ask the pace bowlers, what's your role? What's your job? What is your job? And they look at me funny, I said, no, what's your job? And there's three things: take wickets, stop runs, and stay fit to perform. And if they don't get out of bed every morning wanting to fix and work in those three areas, then I don't think, I had to sort of educate them around that as well. But it was always around, taking wickets, stopping runs, and being fit to perform it. And to do all those three things, you need to stay on the park injury-free. So I knew, like everybody used to say, what's your job? Oh, it's to take wickets. And I say, yeah, but you can't take wickets if you're not on the park, And also with this new game, if you can't stop runs, then you won't stay out there either. So I sort of framed it up around that, and that was sort of entrenched in me well back. So I think it was still performance, but I know you had to stay on the park. So I was really intrigued about how to stay on the park. How do I perform was my question. Everybody wanted to be Dennis Lilly. I wanted to be Dennis Lilly, until I looked in the mirror and I saw it was Troy.
Lilly, absolutely right.
And I all wanted to be Dennis, I don't know. We didn't want to be Jeff Thompson. That action was too hard, but Dennis Lilly, And I wanted to know why I wasn't Dennis Lilly. I understand why am I not getting better? I'm doing all these things. So I think performance is probably there, but it was really closely linked to, staying on the park, Paul. And that obviously was injury prevention. But even injury prevention was all about performance, because if you're performing 9 times out of 10, like the car, if the car's running in tune, it will perform. If the body's running in tune, it will perform. So, performance and injury prevention were always one-on-one with me. But it didn't sell well to the player. Right. And it didn't sell well to the coach, and it didn't sell well to the selector. It didn't sell. I don't worry about injury prevention. I want to win this game. So it went well with the win-loss feeling that sport has to deal with. So performance, win and losing, they didn't want to know about injury prevention. So I had to sort of rename it and come in through the back door and, subtly get injury prevention into the performance category as well, which it is, I think.
Did you think, Troy, because you were learning so much about injury prevention, because you were so curious to just gather knowledge, how did you then start to implement the knowledge that you had into the actions without it looking like a one-size-fits all?
Or I have to apologise to some of those bowlers who we started with. I made a lot of mistakes as well, So I know, some of the things, once you came with all this knowledge, you thought you knew everything. If I change this now and move to that, they will be good. But the trouble is, once you change one thing, it's a domino effect down the line. And, for a body to evolve to what it did and have performance attached to it, and, so you had to be very careful about how you implemented any changes in that model. So I still sort of sitting back thinking, if I want to change something, it's got to be for a damn good reason, And if they're already taking wickets, stopping runs, and staying on the park, then why should I change? If they started falling off and not getting on the park, then that was a clear way to get in and maybe look at the why bit. So I suppose that question is, I was thinking pretty heavily around the science part of it at that stage. So, and the science was telling me that there are some things that you really need to watch out for, and there's some things that you can let go. And I remember, we were pretty heavily into counter rotation. We thought that was going, and especially for the young players under the age of 22. So we went into just getting them a little bit more aligned at the task. But then I would think about, well, how do we get them aligned? What's causing this to start with? So that's when Dennis sort of kicked in. We talked about momentum. All these sort of things started to kick in, Paul. We didn't have the science, but we knew what momentum was doing to the outcome, the task that it was trying to achieve. We all knew that they were trying to bowl an outswinger on off stump, or the intent was there, but, how did they get there? And some got there on a different journey and still were able to do it, But some people couldn't do it. Some people got injured. So we were trying to work out, well, which one do we leave and just let them go? Which one do we intervene with and make a change? And I suppose at that stage, we were too quick to go in and change, rather than have the knowledge about who to change and what not, and how, and what things we should change. So that was still a question that every coach puts in their mind at the moment. Why should I change somebody? And if they're not injured and they're performing, they're taking wickets and having fun, So that became pretty important about how to use this knowledge that we had or was coming into the system. How do we use it and implement it for the performance of the player? That was tough at times, and I made a few mistakes there.
But I think, once again, your humility's coming out there again, Troy, and you're definitely, your intention was absolutely right. Now, I met you over 20 years ago, and you were the earliest adopter of science in cricket, I think. Do you still use it as much as you did, or are you a little bit more selective? Do you keep up to date on the newest research? How do you go about it now?
Yeah, I research. I check out everything Paul writes. I make sure I go through everything. Anything that new comes out, pops up, I'll ask questions, where's the latest piece of research here? It could be running technique, it could be anything, so I'll try. I've learnt to read their research papers a little bit quicker these days, I still very keen, if somebody says they've got a good research paper out there, you better read it, I'll go and have a look at it. And formulate. I'm still learning, this is one of the things I even tell the players, if you haven't got a growth mentality, you might as well not be around. So I'm still learning. I'm still just keen to listen to the science behind it, and how we then take it from the raw science and the facts and put it into, sieve it, through into the player and try and help that player perform is still, what I want to try keep improving, how I coach and take that information and put it into the player. I'm still very much in the learning part of that as well.
And do you keep that within your 5-point framework that you developed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely. I mean, I always think of the great chefs of the world. They have there's some great recipes out there. And they've got all this experience and knowledge, and they're bringing all the ingredients in. I wanted to know what the ingredients that I wanted to frame up and look like, and I always used to think, those great chefs, even though they've got all these ingredients around, they're still doing a couple of little taste and testing all the way through. I need a bit of this. So I felt myself, I wasn't saying I was a great chef, by the way, but what I was thinking is we were tasting and testing all these ingredients along the way. And I love the analogy of the great chefs, how, that needs a bit of salt, or well, maybe that needs a bit of pepper. We had the framework there, but we're still tasting and testing as we go through this. And that's what I love about it, and one chef will produce something that's great, and the other one they'll do it slightly differently, but the ingredients will still be there, but they might add a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But if they miss one out, it's no good. The souffle won't rise. We know that.
I love that. Troy, can we touch on fitness in cricket? Because obviously, going back to what you said earlier, you got yourself qualified in fitness. You were able to mend other people's bodies, but unfortunately not yourself at that particular time. And obviously, fitness has got a lot of science rolled into it. And what's your take on fitness for cricket now for fast bowlers and how it can help them?
Wow, it's evolving. Let's put it that way. Definitely evolving. And I think, for me, I'll always say that if I had one choice, I'd use the game to teach me how to play. So that's the one. But we also know that there's the supplements that you could take away from that. But, fitness is definitely a huge part of it. I mean, it's one of my 3 key pillars, take wicket, stop runs, and stay fit to perform. And I think that fit to perform has to come with a lot of knowledge about what is actually performance for fast bowling. But not only that, there's different fast bowlers doing different things. So you have to sort of understand how you could best implement an individual program for that particular person. We had tall, skinny fellas, we had short, squat fellas, and they all needed a certain little taste and test method, in regards to the recipe to keep them going. So for me, fitness is very important, but it had to be more individualized. You couldn't just lay out, one size fits all. And I think that's evolving beautifully now, So fitness is definitely important. It's a huge part of it. I mean, I keep saying that, look, batters get a stress fracture of their mind because that's what they use. That's what they overuse, where bowlers get a stress fracture of the body. So bowling's a lot more physical. And physical means that you need to know how to prepare the body. So so that's the big part of it that I sort of play, that it's huge. It's a huge part of it. How you get your fitness? Well, that's the taste and test method, and it needs to be individualized. You need to have a good understanding of the movement patterns, that you need to understand what they're trying to do. Are they in-swing bowlers, out-swing bowlers? What are they trying to do? Are they trying to be champion 4-over specialists, or they want to be test matched, So all these things are very important to understand about what it takes to be a fast bowler individually and for each format. And, that requires a fair amount of skill involved in that. So fitness is, I think, the strength and conditioning coaches are starting to evolve beautifully now. And, as we said, there's 3 people in our triangle, and I wouldn't go anywhere without the 3 of them, without the other 2. So, and the third one's obviously the player in the middle. So it's huge. It is huge, but you've got to be careful because it's an individual program as well, and we all move a little bit differently. Even though we've got the beautiful biomechanical principles, there's still no 2 bowlers that actually bowl the same. Actually, there's no 2 balls ever delivered the same. If you look at the way that we do things, but we're finding those common grounds, making sure that we individually fit that to the player the best we possibly can. And the other thing, we never ever forget, we go back to the game, that player's got to be enjoying it and he's got to be able to have fun doing all this, So, I think that's a big part of it. And some people don't like fitness.
No.
Some people get their fitness running around, Some people get their fitness from bowling, So you have to be careful how you use that word fitness.
Yeah.
But it's a big pillar.
Yeah, it's why I stopped trying to be Brett Lee and sat in a chair behind a computer. Sure, I'm really in. Yeah. So stress fracture of brain hasn't occurred yet.
There you go. I have fun with adding coaches on that one.
I'm really interested in something that we see a lot online at the moment around research in other sports and adapting to fast bowling, because you've talked a lot about your background and how you've developed almost on task with Dennis and around fast bowling with Mark and the science.
Yep.
How much do you dig into other sports and how similar do you think they are to fast bowling?
Oh man, we all think that cricket's one of the hardest skills to learn, but it does have some synergies. I mean, the great thing about when I was sort of growing up and coming through was the AIS connection. I mean, I'd go to Canberra and they'd be lactate testing players in the pool. They'd be jump testing high jumpers. They'd be doing run-up work over here with running gates over here for the triple jumpers. The baseballers were over here working on the mounds. I mean, I went on a study tour around the US in 2018 and watched. I want to learn how other sports do it, but I have to be very careful about how we transfer that back to the game, because some people can get too wrapped up in that particular side of things. You've got to be able to translate it and turn it back into the skill-specific stuff of the game. So I love looking at other sports. I love seeing what they're doing. You can learn so much if you keep your mind open to that. But you've got to be able to bring it back to what you do and be very specific about what you do. And the application parts are a big part of your job as the coach to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's the what and why again, I think. What do they do, but then why do you want to use it? Which I think is...
Yeah. I see a lot of research coming out of baseball, but, baseball throw it up. We throw it down. Well, actually, we bowl it down. We don't throw it up. So, so you had to, they don't deal with the momentum issues that we deal with. So you have to understand the core skill of fast bowling, and that's where I think Paul, and Mark Portis and all the people, they've unlocked us about what we actually need to, how we need to move. What is that skill looking like? The biomechanical principles, all those sort of stuff about how do we get, a 25K run up, turn it into a 140K ball, So, and so I think, from a coaching perspective, look, I want to be the best resource possible to a player. I don't call myself a coach. I want to be the best resource possible to a player, So I look at that, and to do that, I need to know how to take a skill from here to here under light. So from the cognitive stage right through to the end product. So I think you can learn a lot from other sports, but you've got to be able to apply it back to your sport, and you need to have a deep understanding of your sport to do that.
Just to take that a little bit further on, Truck, what about social media? Do you think it's a help or a hindrance?
Oh, listen, social media. Okay. Well, social media's opened up so many different opportunities. I mean, look, you can't have one without the other. So, I think it's a great tool, but you also got to know how to use it, I mean, social media is the way we communicate. I'm talking to my daughter a few years ago. I said, social media, everybody's, it was Twitter. Well, it wasn't Twitter back then. I can't remember. It was or Facebook and whatever. But, I was dead against it. And I said, look, it's not a way to communicate. She said, Dad, you've got to come into the new age. This is how we communicate. I said, but you don't communicate. You've got 1,000 friends. I've got probably 5, on this hand. You're one of them. And she said, no, Dad, that's not the way. We've just learned to communicate differently. So I had to learn how to use this communication tool. But it's a great tool to communicate. It can get information so much quicker to every area that you need to. But you've got to know how to use it. And you've got to respect it, like anything. So, yeah, it has a good side to it. And like anything else, it has a bad side to it. So you've got to find that medium in the middle. But I like it. So I'm an advocate for social media.
So would you follow more science-based people or more coaching-based people or performance people?
I've got 5 things I follow. One is about leadership. One is about the how to get a skill better. One is about pace bowling. And the other one's about the game. So those 4 areas. So anything to do with those 4 areas, I'll go in and look at. So I keep my and obviously, I've got my family and things like that, of course. But any one of those 4, I'll go and look at. If I can be a better leader, I can be a better teacher of a skill, I can be a better coach of fast bowling. I think those are the areas. And if I can learn how to use this game and improve this game, that's the one. They're the areas I'll look at.
Yeah, fantastic. Felton, do you want to go over sort of female versus male and young versus old? That question with Troy.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously, with the female games getting massive and growing very quickly, Troy. So, obviously, you've come through your framework of it being probably very male orientated in the learnings, and then I think I probably rue you taking that data collection session at the ECB back in whenever it was before I joined, and then I had to try and work out what data and what you'd collected a few years later when the girls asked for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, can you just talk us through like your journey with how that's grown, but also like what differences or if there are differences in your framework of how you coach them, etc.
Yeah. Well, I get into trouble when I say men are from Mars and girls are from Venus. So one of the things that we know that, that they differently do things differently because they are different, biologically different. Even the psychological side of things is different. We know this. So one is I know you can't apply one to the other. So you have to know the differences. And, I've read some of your research and all this, about, how they develop their force, how they do all this things differently to men. So I've been very open to wanting to understand how best to coach the female or the women. So for me, I was Sri Lanka. I was coaching the spinners today. Shiny, you'd be happy with this, So our show's coming back from a full knee reco, and Sri Lanka's had some shin stuff. So I'm actually coaching the spinners as well, because that's another story which we can divulge, because I think, the whole blend of fast bowling's changed now. We've got most of our fast bowlers who want to bowl slow, and most of our slow bowlers want to bowl fast. So the bloody definition of fast bowling's gone out the window, So anyway, so come back to your question. Yeah, definitely. So yeah, definitely looking at the mechanics, the way that they produce force, the run-up speed, all this sort of stuff is definitely something you need to factor into how you would look at error detection or performance additives to help the females become better at their job.
Cool. I think following on from that is that, do you think then, or how would you coach someone from 12 all the way through to the elite game? Do you think it changes, or do you think what's your framework on taking a 12-year-old through to the elite game? If you had a 12-year-old Brett Lee now, do you think it'd still be the same or different, or a 12-year-old Boomerang?
Definitely, it's definitely changed. I think I'm a bit, look, someone said, how, you have to chat, but you have to have a run up that looks like this, and I said, yeah, but how come Jasper Boomer gets away with this? But then understanding that within his framework of doing it, he actually hits the markers of what we need to do to get the momentum that you need to be able to bowl. So you have to understand momentum. So a 12-year-old, wow, I cut my teeth in schools with 12-year-olds, you know. So first of all, you've got to make it fun, and two, you know, you've got to make sure that that the fundamentals are sort of pretty well laid down. But also, you know, the game's still the greatest teacher, and you know, take a leaf out of Sir Donald Bradman's book. You know, I'm not going to tell them what to do. I'm going to give them a task and see how well they do it first. And if they do it well, then you don't have to do anything, you know. And again, based on some of the science behind what we know can shorten the lifespan of a 12-year-old all the way through until their full bone maturity, you know, we know that, you know, we've got to get the balance of high intensity work and recoveries done well. We've got to understand what growth spurts are. We've got to understand, you know, how much effort we're putting in at what time. So you need to understand the workload, or the preparation to play model needs to be factored into what they're doing. So yeah, you've got all those things to consider. You know, you've got the game, wickets, runs, and fit to perform. You know, you're looking at knowing that these young kids need to have a lot of fun, and they need to be very mindful of when you start hitting 16, you're starting to turn into, you're going to professional people who are now telling you what to do. At 12 years of age, you just played the game, but then you start to get into these professional areas where you're actually being coached. So I think those are the sort of things that you have to be mindful of if you're coaching through those ages. But definitely age is a big factor. You know, we know that the bodies are going through growth spurts. We know that those bones aren't developing. They're not going to be hardened really until you get to about 22, you know what I mean? So you still got to watch how you're loading those bones up, how you're unloading them. And, you know, some key fundamentals on the technical side of things, you know, how they're moving, you know. I mean, have they already, their intent is to bowl like Brett Lee? Are they copied Brett Lee? Or they've done no coaching at all? So all those things need to be factored into, you know, the person in front of you presenting who has this insatiable appetite, hopefully to be the best bowler they could be. And you just don't want to get in the way of them. You want to be able to help them. And that can become more of an individual thing. But, you know, 12-year-olds are out having fun. But there's some things that you need to just be mindful of again. And as I said, you know, the structure of, you know, what do I use? Age, technique, preparation to play, which is the workload, and motivation, you know. So making sure that my coaching always had an element of fun attached to it at the 12-year-old. And, you know, even now, I think if I'm not having fun in my training sessions, I don't think that the player's going to have any fun. I'm not saying don't challenge them, you know, because, you know, most of these champions, even at that age, want to be challenged. So you have to find the right challenge at the right time to try and keep stimulating them to keep going. You know what I mean? So at those points, even the 12-year-old wants to get better. But you have to be mindful. There's some things at those young ages that you need to understand, and you need to get your head in the science around that. Definitely. And if there's one thing I could walk away is just remember that, you know, a stress fracture is the body's inability to do the job you're giving it. So if you're a coach giving them a job that they can't do, then, you know, you've got to make sure that you understand what you're doing, you know, and, you know, because as I said, once you get to that sort of, well, I think it's getting earlier and earlier with the coaching now, but 15 and 16 is when you start going into structured high performance programs where you're actually being told what to do. Up until then, my dad would disagree because I never got told what to do, even through to my late teens. But you have to be very careful when you start telling people what to do. You've got to know your why then. And up until sort of then, kids are having fun, but then they start turning into these professional high performance camps. So yeah, my advice is to get as much knowledge as you can about how the body moves, how you coach, motivation, the psychological side of things. So I think that's very important.
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to 2003 when I first met you, Troy, and you know that made me. I actually felt quite inadequate when I was speaking to you, but not in a way that demotivated me, in a way to go, I need to know more to be able to help these, you know, fantastic athletes that we've got reach their potential. And if they feel like they can let me into their world, then I owe it to them to be as educated as I possibly can be. So going back to 2003, where I thought this guy is so far ahead of his time, I want to hear what you've got to say for my last question. This has been an amazing couple of hours here. So what do you think the fast bowler of the future will look like, and how or will we need to coach them in the future?
Wow. Yeah, crystal balls. Predictions never ever come true. We're terrible at predicting whether the weather's going to rain tomorrow. So predictions are so bloody hard to do. I will take you back to a question though. I remember, first of all, walking into John Buchanan, and we were embarking on that 07 World Cup win, and I just rejoined, and we were sitting around. He was conjuring up his method about how he was going to get this World Cup, 2007 World Cup done, and he was doing all this work, and he came across and he was talking about what the bowlers should do, and I was pretty, I just come back from England, we just won the Ashes back, and I said, and he said, well, we've got to do a couple of things. He said, Truck, is there any chance we'll ever develop a fast bowler that can bowl not just 100 miles an hour? Can they bowl? Can they physically bowl 150, 200 miles an hour? And I thought, well, why not? So I remember going off to Mark Porter's. He hates me when he used to come with these. I said, Porto, what's somebody got to look like if they want to bowl 150 miles an hour? What are the attributes? What do they have to do to produce that amount of bloody power to get that ball out of their hand? And he came up with this model, and a lot of the modeling stuff that you did come out of this, by the way, but and the length of the arm, all this sort of stuff. He had. I mean, I can't quote exactly what this person would have to look like. So I was armed with the science, and I've gone back to Buck, John, and said, John, okay, if they're going to bowl 150 plus, this is what they're going to have to look like. And it was some ugly looking thing, And I said, the other thing too is we can't do it. He said, why not? I said, because at 150 Ks, that bat's not going to last. That pad's going to have to be changed. Those stumps aren't going to last. The keeper's not going to be any, it's not going to work. I said, so that was sort of the future look back then. The future look going forward. Wow. Look at what technology is doing now. I'm a big player. I'm talking to Kevin Shiner, loves tech. You introduced me to technology, Shiny. Don't worry about this.
I do love tech.
You've got a lot to blame for what I'm going to say. But technology plays a huge part. But it's got to do two things. It's either going to make them do things quicker or do things better than they're already doing. So if it doesn't do those two things, I don't want to see it. But, look at what the GPS units are doing now, the AI stuff that you guys are involved in, try to simplify. I love what Einstein said, make things as simple as possible, but no simpler, and that sort of mucked around in my head for a long time. What is he saying here, and then I finally worked out what he was trying to say. But the technology is going to be becoming a big player in what we do. I think it already is. I think how we evolve from all the research, the stuff that Paul's doing in regards to how do we get that body in its best position, but how do we get that particular individual in that right position? And can we coach that position when they're 15, 16, 17? How long will it take to move that skill from... Because I think skill's layered, you have your skill, then you layer something on and layer something on and layer something on and layer something. So skill's always layering on top, How long will it take, and what is going to be the effect of moving that skill from there to there? And when do you do it, So there's all those sort of questions need to be really still asked about the why you would change something. But technology is definitely going to be a big player in what we do. I think as long as we keep thinking about the game, we know that the selectors are not worried about anything other than taking wickets, stopping runs, and staying fit and winning. We know that the fans want to see entertainment. And just always never lose fact that it's a game, and the game's supposed to have an element of fun attached to it, you know. And I think as long as we don't intervene too much and lose that side of it, we'll evolve the game out. And you know, if I could say, if we could stop some of those stress fractures of the back and that would be a big part of it. You know, if we can be a lot better at identifying, you know, workload recommendations that allow players to know where their edge is. But in saying that, you know, I sat in a room for 4 of the best fast bowlers that ever sort of crossed the Australian borders. Yeah, well, we're inside the Australian borders, and you know, we were talking about this workload management, the dirty word, workload management. And, you know, and they were sort of saying to me, listen, you know, I have to believe that I'm never going to get injured. This is what they say. I have to believe that I'm not going to get injured. If I believe that I'm going to get injured, then I'll always be second guessing myself. I want to be Superman. I want to make sure that when I go into the game, so don't tell me I can't do something was their first thing to me as a coach. Don't tell me I can't do anything, because I'm going to prove to you I can. So I had to be careful there. And I said, well, look, it's just physical. With the schedule going the way it is, the 3 formats coming in, you can't play everything. And at that stage, this is a few years ago now, they just said, look, you can tell me maybe I can miss a one-day game here and there, but I can't miss a test match. So they're already sort of saying to me, don't take the fun out of it, and don't tell me I can't do something. So if I can use technology, if I can use the art and science in a conversation better to be able to say to them, look, here's some ideas about how to coach yourself, and you go away and coach yourself and come up with the answers. I think that would be a great way for me to pass my knowledge on to them, and also for them to evolve into their best coach possible for themselves. So I think the player of the future is going to know everything they need to know, and it's not off social media. They're going to know everything they need to know about how to prepare themselves properly, that they're going to be able to access information quickly, that it's going to be individualized. They'll know how to profile themselves properly. They'll know how to test themselves. That they'll become their best coach. And that might say that, hey, listen, you're doing yourself out of a job, truck. And then I'm okay with that. Oh, I am. I'm okay with that. They become the best coach. Then I can sit back and watch them perform, because I want to go and watch them play. So I think the player of the future will be very, very knowledgeable. They'll have technology to help support them. Then they'll be able to, you know, still be very creative in what they do. They'll be able to entertain, and they'll keep me coming back to the game to come and watch them. You know, and I think that's the player that I think that I want to be a part of coaching and evolving to see a player of the future.
I feel like I've had a good insight with me and Shiny having similar conversations over the years. But I think you do yourself a disservice. I think we might understand more of what and why, and players hopefully will know that. But I still think that there's a real art to understanding how to get players to do it, and the how, I think, will be where everyone will stay in their job.
But definitely, you know, player-centric, you know, I think that was the big thing, that my evolution as a coach, you know, and I learnt that I can't change anybody, you know, but I can influence, and what I was going to influence, it had to be the best information possible at the time. And if I didn't have that information, then I couldn't call myself a skill coach, you know. So I had to know everything about the skill, and I had to apply that to fast bowling. But you know, I dabbled in batting, and dabbled a bit in spin bowling, and you know, the great game we've chosen to try and come to terms with.
Yeah, I haven't quite gone there yet. I can't force myself to do it. Have a little dabble every now and again.
No, you got to go across to the dark side, Shiny. Go across to the dark side. You got to, you know.
I nearly got
I keep getting
disowned.
told that.
When I wrote some spin papers, Shiny nearly disowned me for a year.
No, I learned a lot out of those spin papers. You know, how do you think that the fast bowlers bowl their overspinning? Oh, beautiful.
I kind of my framework of like the momentum is almost you have your off spin bowler at the bottom and your 100-mile-an-hour bowling at the top. So it's like,
Oh, Mike, you just
you're somewhere in it.
You see, the other night, off spinners bowling bouncers and getting wickets, off bouncers. So the whole ball here, you can't rewrite the definition of bowling, all right? Because it used to be a spin bowler turns the ball, a fast bowler doesn't turn it. Well, that's not it anymore.
It has, yeah. It's just turned itself on its head, hasn't it?
Oh, great. But it's great. It's evolving. And I think, the evolution of the game is definitely keeping us all on our toes, And how we prepare, these players coming in with this with this inspiration, their own internal motivation, I remember, once it was, everybody we thought wanted the baggy green. That's where they were going. And I was listening to players, 10 years ago thinking, I just want to play for my country. They weren't talking about the baggy green like they were with Rod Marsh and Dennis Lilly. I was going back to Rod at the time saying, Bacchus, they're not saying they want the baggy green. They want to play for Australia. And I asked them what they say, and they're saying, well, there's one-day cricket and there's all T20 cricket. So playing for Australia didn't mean the baggy green anymore. So these players were motivated differently. So I had to understand and I had to know why they were sitting in front of me, and that became so important of knowing why they were sitting there.
Troy, I'm sitting here now like I did in 2003 when I met you, which is, I now want to keep getting better, keep moving on, keep learning about the game so we can do exactly what you've just said, which is make these players almost their own best coaches.
Yeah.
So I can't thank you enough for, in your amazingly busy schedule, taking some time out to talk to us. So I really, really thank you very much, and all the best out in India. And then hope you enjoy watching some cricket in the future with all these wonderful players that you've worked with. And if you think about it, and I'll leave you with this, if you think about it, the amount of players and coaches that have improved through your influence, I probably don't know many coaches that will have more players and coaches that have been touched by your influence. So thank you very much for everything you've done for me, and hopefully people enjoy listening to you talk here.